A couple of months ago, I made a video on what Pope Francis has said about evangelism and the distinctions he makes between proselytism and evangelism. One of the documents I made use of was Evangelii Gaudium that Pope Francis published in 2013. When I made the video, I was trying to think how self-proclaimed traditional Catholics would respond in order to dismiss the facts and try to justify their attacks on Pope Francis regarding this topic. There was one thing I thought of at the time, but then I was like, nah, this is a really bad argument, it is false, it is illogical, and ignores everything else. So I didn't even think that it was necessary to bring up, because no one will be this bad in their arguments. So I didn't mention it in that video. But a couple of months go by and I watch a video by a self-proclaimed traditional Catholic actually using that argument in order to prove that Pope Francis is against evangelism. Yeah, I guess it was my mistake for having faith that people won't use bad arguments to refute good arguments in order to substantiate another bad argument. Since I doubt that the person in question would be alone in using this bad argument, and since he already made this position public, which is misleading his Catholic audience, meaning that this error is out into the world, I think it is worth it if I gave a response so the correction will also be available. So this is the argument in question. All of those pro-evangelism things in Evangelii Gaudium, which Pope Francis supposedly said in 2013, it wasn't actually Pope Francis, it was the words of Benedict. It was actually Benedict's document. Therefore, you have no evidence that Pope Francis is pro-evangelism. The original argument still stands. Pope Francis is against evangelism. I have three things to say in response to this. Firstly, even if every single word was originally the words of Benedict, Pope Francis still approved of it, published it, he made the words his own and communicated it to the Catholic bishops and the Catholic faithful. Are we just supposed to ignore that? He clearly supports the document and put his stamp of approval on it. It is part of the magisterium of Pope Francis, so the argument is illogical. The second thing I would like to say is that the argument is not only illogical, it is just completely wrong. Consider what Jimmy Akin wrote back in 2013, long before this discussion was even relevant. Why did Pope Francis write Evangelii Gaudium? It was written in response to the most recent meeting of the Synod of Bishops, which took place in October 2012. It was devoted to the subject of the new evangelization. So that is the subject of Evangelii Gaudium. This synod took place before Pope Francis was elected in March 2013. It sometimes happens that the synod is held and the pope who presided over it leaves office before the exhortation is released. His successor may then choose to go forward with the project. For example, the 2005 synod on the Eucharist was held under John Paul II, but he had passed on before an exhortation was released. Benedict XVI then took the document that the bishops had prepared and had an exhortation written. Usually the Pope does not draft the document himself, but it is drafted based on his decisions, and he has final approval over what it says. Pope Francis's decision in this case is similar to his decision to release the encyclical Lumen Fidei, which was primarily drafted by Pope Benedict, but which he completed. Unlike that case though, Pope Francis contributed much more to this document. With Lumen Fidei, he did not add very much to what Pope Benedict had written. Evangelii Gaudium, by contrast, is much more a Francis document. It regularly emphasizes the distinctive thought and themes of the new Pope. So yes, Pope Benedict was involved before, but Pope Francis added a lot and it really is a Pope Francis document. You cannot read Evangelii Gaudium without clearly recognizing that Pope Francis is behind this document. Unlike most people, I actually read it a few months ago, and as I was reading it, I was just like, yeah, this is clearly Pope Francis. And the third and last thing I would like to say is, let's grant the argument. Let's ignore the fact that the argument is wrong and illogical. Let's throw Evangelii Gaudium away. Wait, don't actually throw it away because it is a great document. I just mean let's ignore it in this discussion. It is pretty ridiculous that someone would try to only focus on this one document and then somehow be ignorant of all the other times Pope Francis was pro-evangelism. For example, Many months ago, Pope Francis made clear that being missionary, being apostolic, evangelizing is not the same as proselytizing. They have nothing to do with one another. Yeah, Pope Francis is against proselytism, according to its newer definition, which I wrote an article about on Reason and Theology, by the way. Check it out. Everyone should support Pope Francis to reject proselytism according to its new definition. But Pope Francis clearly said that it is not the same as evangelism. And, by the way, Pope Benedict also said that the church does not grow by proselytism, just like Pope Francis. But why did no one attack Pope Benedict when he said that? Maybe because now people don't actually try to find the truth. They are looking for any excuse to attack Pope Francis. If people are going to attack Pope Francis unfairly, at least be consistent and attack Pope Benedict unfairly as well. Wait, actually, don't do that. Rather be inconsistent because then you will sin less. But what am I saying? You should repent, go to confession, and be consistent in the truth. But getting back to what Pope Francis said here, he is saying that, yeah, you should be a missionary and evangelize. And look what Pope Francis said back in March. Dear brothers and sisters, I renew my invitation to you to read and reread Evangelii Nuntiandi. I will tell you the truth, I read it often, because it is St. Paul VI's masterpiece. It is the legacy he left to us, to evangelize. Like honestly, read Evangelii Nuntiandi of Pope Paul VI. It is arguably the most comprehensive treatment on evangelism in the 2000 years of the Church. For Pope Francis to encourage other people to read it, and that he himself reads it often, and that it is a masterpiece, if Pope Francis was against evangelism, this would be like Joseph Stalin reading the Gospels often, and encouraging all the communists to read the Gospels and saying that the Gospels is a masterpiece. It is just beyond ridiculous. I cannot emphasize this enough. And that is not all. Just look at Pope Francis's general audiences of this year. He has been preaching about evangelism almost every single week. For example, Pope Francis praises missionary work like that of Saint Francis Xavier. How on earth can you say that the Pope is against evangelism? Pope Francis literally said back in 2019 that the vocation of the church is to evangelize. The very identity of the church involves evangelizing. Evangelization, yes. Proselytism, no. We must evangelize. Like, why do people still bring this up? It is honestly not difficult to find the truth. Really, it isn't. I'll show you. Okay, let's see. Pope Francis evangelize. Okay, let's see. Let me open the first link. Let's see what it says. Okay, so it says that you need to read Evangelii Nuntiandi. It is very important. Okay. Evangelization is a witness. Okay. This witness is the first means of evangelization. It is essential condition for its efficacy so that the proclamation of the gospel will be fruitful. So the gospel has to be proclaimed. Let's see what else. Okay, so evangelization is not only for others. We also need to do it. It is for everyone. The church has to evangelize herself as well. Yep, that is absolutely true. Okay, so yeah, then it just says read this again, which we already talked about. He reads it often. Nice. Okay. So this is the first link. Let's open the second link. Okay, so this is about St. Paul's letter to the Galatians. Okay, so we spoke of the work of evangelization. So the great work of evangelization by Paul, who was a missionary to the communities. Okay, So St. Paul evangelized during his missionary journeys, and it was a great work, interesting. And here he speaks positively about evangelization, the indefatigable work of St. Paul and his evangelization. The apostle succeeded in founding several communities, so this is a good thing. So he speaks positively about St. Paul's missionary work of evangelization, where he founded new Christian communities. So you're telling me that this guy is against evangelization? Do you remember when I made that short video where I did the most basic search result to rebuke and refute Ray Comfort spreading misinformation about Pope Francis? Well, I just did the same thing, but instead of rebuking and refuting an anti-Catholic Protestant by a basic search result, I am rebuking and refuting people who claim to be traditional Catholics. And ironically, their misinformation about Pope Francis is even worse than those of anti-Catholic Protestants in this case. I would laugh, but it is actually quite sad. So do remember to pray for these people. Sometimes I get really frustrated and angry at these people's bad behavior, but we shouldn't forget to pray for them and for them to repent, so don't forget that. I hope you have a blessed day. Thank you for watching.